healthy third-round rookie just lost his job. Not because he was suspended, not because he melted down, not because he wasn't cleared to play. He was benched while fully healthy. And the quarterback replacing him? A fifth-round pick most teams passed on, a player some scouts reportedly labeled entitled. A prospect who slid all the way to pick 144 while analysts debated whether he was more hype than substance. Now he's running a multi-billion-dollar franchise. That's the reality unfolding in Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns didn't just make a lineup change, they detonated their quarterback room. What started as a rookie competition has turned into one of the most polarizing decisions of the season. Dillon Gabriel, drafted in the third round and handed the keys from day one, is suddenly watching from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders, overlooked, doubted, dissected, has been officially named the starter for the rest of the year. And here, where it gets even more intense. Cleveland is projected to have 2 first-round picks in the 2026 draft. One could land in the top 5. That means even if Sanders flashes brilliance, the Browns could still be staring at another quarterback reset in just a few months. So this isn't just about who starts Week 13. It's about whether Cleveland finally found its guy, or whether this is just the beginning of another cycle that could set the franchise back years. Because when a team benches a healthy third-round pick after 6 games, it sends a message. The question is, who was that message really for? No one expected this story to begin with a fall. Heading into the 2025 NFL Draft, Shedeur Sanders was widely projected as a first-round talent. Mock drafts had him landing somewhere between picks 10 and 25. Analysts debated which quarterback-needy team would take the leap on the son of Deion Sanders. The arm talent was there. The production was undeniable. Over 4,000 yards and 37 touchdowns at Colorado, behind one of the most criticized offensive lines in college football. And then silence. The first round came and went. 32 names called, none of them were his. Day 2 didn't help. Quarterbacks flew off the board, defensive stars disappeared, teams traded up, still nothing. The questions started building. What were teams seeing that the public was? Were there red flags nobody wanted to admit? When the Cleveland Browns came on the clock in the third round, it felt like the perfect landing spot. A franchise desperate for stability at quarterback, a high-upside prospect still available. The fit made too much sense. Instead, Cleveland selected Dillon Gabriel. And it didn't stop there. The Browns passed on Sanders again later in the round. That's when things began to feel deliberate. Rumors started swirling almost immediately. Reports claimed some executives weren't impressed with his draft interviews. Others suggested teams question how he'd handle coaching at the next level. A few anonymous scouts even described him as entitled, though those claims were never substantiated publicly. It's important to note much of that chatter remains speculative, but perception in the NFL can shift quickly, especially when fame enters the equation. Because this wasn't just another prospect, this was Deion Sanders' son. Media attention followed him everywhere. Some believe that spotlight worked against him. And yet the tape told a different story. Calm under pressure, accurate in tight windows, unshaken behind chaos. So when Cleveland finally traded up in the 5th round to take him at pick 144, the reaction wasn't excitement. It was disbelief. The question wasn't whether he could play. It was why so many teams, including Cleveland twice, chose not to believe in him. Here's the part people forget. Cleveland didn't draft Dillon Gabriel by accident. When the Browns selected him in the 3rd round, they weren't hedging their bets. They were committing. Gabriel came into the draft with something teams value more than hype: experience. 6 full college seasons, over 150 total touchdowns, an offense he commanded at the line of scrimmage. Coaches saw maturity. They saw polish. They saw someone who could step into a locker room and steady it immediately. And for a franchise exhausted by quarterback chaos, that mattered. Gabriel wasn't drafted to sit and develop. He was drafted to start. From training camp through preseason, he took first-team reps. The offense was tailored to his strengths: quick timing routes, RPO concepts, rhythm throws designed to get the ball out fast. Cleveland didn't hesitate. They handed him the job and made it clear this was their guy. On paper, the logic made sense. But the concerns that followed him from college didn't just disappear. At just under 6 feet tall, sightlines became tighter against NFL defensive fronts. Scouts had quietly questioned whether his arm strength would hold up in tight windows. Others wondered if, after 6 college seasons, he was already near his developmental ceiling. Through 6 starts, the numbers painted a difficult picture. The Browns went 1-5. Gabriel completed just under 60% of his passes and averaged barely over 5 yards per attempt. On third downs, when games are decided, the offense stalled, drives ended, momentum vanished. Cleveland ranked near the bottom of the league in QBR during that stretch. To be fair, it wasn't all on him. The offensive line struggled, protection broke down. But when the margin for error is razor thin, limitations get exposed quickly. Gabriel processed well, he understood the system, coaches appreciated his command. What he couldn't consistently provide was that explosive element, the throw that forces defenses to back up, the play that flips momentum instantly. And then against Baltimore, everything changed. One hit, one protocol check. And suddenly, the plan Cleveland committed to just months earlier was no longer secure. It wasn't a benching at first. It was one violent collision. Late in the first half against Baltimore, Dillon Gabriel took a brutal hit as multiple defenders collapsed the pocket at once. He popped back up, tried to shake it off, even lined up for another snap, but something looked off. Slower, slightly disoriented, not himself. By halftime, the medical staff stepped in. Concussion protocol. Just like that, the third-round starter was done for the day. And Cleveland's season pivoted in real time. Because standing on the sideline was Shedeur Sanders, a fifth-round pick who hadn't taken a single first-team rep that week. Not one. For most of the season, he'd been buried on the depth chart, running scout team looks and watching an offense built specifically for Gabriel's quick-release strengths. Now he was being thrown into the fire against one of the league's most physical defenses. No warm-up, no tailored game plan, no easing into it. The box score wasn't pretty: 4 completions, 1 interception, a lopsided loss. Within minutes, the reaction machine started up. Social media lit up with "this is why he fell" takes. Analysts questioned whether the draft slide had been justified all along. But context matters. He was operating inside a system not designed for him, behind an offensive line that had already been struggling against a defense that smelled blood. That's not development, that's survival. And here's the part that quietly shifted everything. Despite the rough numbers, coaches reportedly noticed something different. Sanders didn't panic. He didn't speed up. He stood in the pocket and tried to make real NFL throws under pressure. For a rookie making his debut mid-game with 0 prep, that composure stood out. It wasn't explosive, it wasn't headline-worthy. But inside that building, it planted a seed. Because sometimes, it's not about what shows up in the stat sheet. It's about what shows up when everything is collapsing around you. And 1 week later, that seed turned into something Cleveland couldn't ignore. It only takes one throw to change a narrative. A week after being thrown into chaos against Baltimore, Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field with something different: confidence. Not forced, not loud, just steady, and then it happened. A 66-yard strike that didn't just light up the scoreboard, it shifted the entire energy inside the stadium. The ball traveled with authority, tight spiral, perfect placement, no hesitation. In one snap, Sanders did something Cleveland's offense hadn't consistently done all season: stretch the field and force a defense to respect the deep ball. That wasn't just a highlight. It was a warning shot. Safeties immediately had to back up. Corners couldn't crowd short routes. Linebackers hesitated before crashing downhill. Space opened underneath. The offense suddenly looked different, more alive, more dangerous, more unpredictable. And that changes everything for a quarterback battle. Sanders didn't just flash arm strength, he showed timing, anticipation, command at the line. For the first time, the Browns' offense looked capable of flipping momentum in one play instead of grinding for it yard by yard. Then came the win. In his first official start, Sanders led Cleveland to a 24-10 victory over Las Vegas. It wasn't flawless. There were rookie moments, but he made history as the first Browns rookie quarterback to win his debut start since the 1990s. For a franchise haunted by quarterback instability, that mattered more than people realized. Inside the locker room, the tone began to shift. Receivers looked energized. Coaches spoke differently in press conferences. The conversation wasn't about survival anymore, it was about upside. And here, where it got uncomfortable. Just days later, Dillon Gabriel cleared concussion protocol. fully healthy, ready to return. In most NFL buildings, that means you get your job back. But Cleveland wasn't most buildings anymore. Because after that 66-yard statement, the question wasn't whether Sanders could play. It was whether the Browns could afford to take the ball out of his hands. This is where the situation turned ice cold. In most NFL locker rooms, there's an unspoken rule: if you lose your job because of injury, you get a fair shot to reclaim it once you're healthy. It's a respect thing, a trust thing, a message to the entire roster that performance isn't erased by bad luck. Dillon Gabriel cleared concussion protocol. No symptoms, no restrictions, medically ready. By every traditional standard, that should have reopened the competition. It didn't. On December 9th, Kevin Stefanski made it official. Shedeur Sanders would remain the starter for the rest of the season. No rotation, no week-to-week language, no vague coach speak, just a firm decision. That move said more than any press conference ever could. It wasn't about health, it wasn't about easing Gabriel back in, it was about evaluation. Internally, the staff had seen enough to believe Sanders offered something Gabriel simply couldn't match. That's a brutal message for a third-round rookie just 6 starts into his career. And naturally, speculation followed. Some fans believe Stefanski didn't want to admit the original evaluation was flawed. Others argue this proves the staff adjusted quickly instead of doubling down out of ego. There's no confirmed friction inside the building, but when a coaching staff pivots this hard, rumors are inevitable. Trade whispers even started circulating. It's been said that teams could inquire about Gabriel if Cleveland commits fully to Sanders. Nothing official, just league chatter. But here's the deeper layer. By keeping Sanders in, Stefanski tied his own future to a 5th-round pick. That's not a small gamble. Coaches fighting for long-term security don't usually stake it on late-round rookies unless they truly believe. And belief is powerful. Because when a coach breaks the league's unwritten rule, he's not just making a football decision. He's sending a message to the locker room. The question now isn't whether Sanders earned the job. It's whether Cleveland is finally choosing upside over comfort, even if it means burning bridges along the way. And just when it feels like Shedeur Sanders has momentum, a shadow starts creeping in. Because this isn't just about the rest of 2025. The Cleveland Browns are projected to hold 2 first-round picks in the 2026 NFL Draft. Depending on how this season finishes, one of those selections could land inside the top 5, and everyone in the league knows what that means. Elite quarterback territory. That's the part nobody inside the locker room wants to say out loud. If Sanders plays well but not great, Cleveland could find itself in the most uncomfortable position imaginable. Good enough to show promise, not dominant enough to eliminate doubt. That gray area is where franchises panic. And Cleveland has lived in panic mode before. Over the last 2 decades, the Browns have cycled through quarterback after quarterback, constantly resetting the timeline. Draft, develop, doubt, replace, repeat. The scars of those decisions still linger in this organization. So now the question becomes strategic. Do you commit to the 5th-round surprise who flashed upside under pressure? Or do you use premium draft capital on a higher-ranked prospect next spring and restart the clock again? Some league observers believe Cleveland will quietly scout the 2026 quarterback class regardless of how Sanders performs. That doesn't mean they've given up on him, it's just how front offices operate. Due diligence never stops. But if those evaluations start gaining momentum, the pressure on Sanders multiplies instantly. Because now he's not just competing against opposing defenses. He's competing against the draft board. And here's the twist: this pressure could either elevate him or destabilize everything. Young quarterbacks don't just battle coverages, they battle organizational patience. If Sanders thrives despite a shaky offensive line and heavy pressure rates, he forces Cleveland's hand. If he falters late in the year, the temptation to upgrade becomes almost irresistible. This is the tightrope. The Browns aren't just evaluating a starter. They're deciding whether they finally found stability or whether another reset button is waiting just months away. This is bigger than a depth chart. What's happening right now inside the Cleveland Browns organization isn't just about Shedeur Sanders beating out Dillon Gabriel. It's about identity. It's about whether this franchise has finally learned from 2 decades of quarterback chaos, or if we're watching the early stages of the same cycle repeating itself. Sanders hasn't been operating in a perfect system, far from it. He's faced pressure on nearly half of his dropbacks. The offensive line has struggled to hold the pocket. Drives have broken down before they even develop. And yet, in the middle of that disorder, he's flashed something Cleveland hasn't consistently had in years: composure with upside. Not safe, not conservative, not playing not to lose. Playing to win. There have been mistakes, forced throws, rookie misreads, a late interception that cost momentum. But there have also been deep shots that stretched defenses, decisive reads at the line, and an offense that suddenly looks like it can threaten teams vertically instead of just surviving possession by possession. That matters. But here's the tension. Cleveland still holds premium draft capital. The front office will still evaluate incoming quarterbacks. The pressure won't disappear just because Sanders has momentum. In fact, it might intensify. Because when a franchise has options, patience becomes fragile. So what happens next defines everything. Do the Browns commit and build around him, invest in protection, design the system to amplify his strengths, give him the stability young quarterbacks need to grow? Or do they hesitate, overthink, reset again? Because we've seen this movie before in Cleveland. Promise turns into doubt, doubt turns into replacement, replacement turns into another rebuild. This moment feels different. But the real test isn't nomming a starter in December. It's resisting the urge to panic in April. So the question is whether Shedeur Sanders can be the guy. The real question is whether Cleveland is finally ready to stand behind one.